remaining inwardly focused. Let's listen to these words on today's affirmation topic. Self-confidence. This is from Affirmations for Self-Healing by Swami Kriyananda. Self-confidence, as it is normally understood, recalls to mind images of army generals and cowboy heroes, people, in short, who know their blacks from their whites. But life's alternatives are usually much more complex. Self-confidence on the spiritual path is of another order altogether. It means confidence in the inner self, not in the ego. It means living from within, living by truth rather than by opinions. It means living by what God wants, not by what man wants. Thus it means living by faith in the sure knowledge that although man is fallible, God is infallible. Let's practice this affirmation together silently. First, very vigorously, you can close your eyes and gaze upward into the point between the eyebrows and say these words very strongly, and then we'll repeat it 3 more times, taking it more and more deeply within. Repeat inwardly with me. I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. Offer this into the subconscious mind now. I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. And now say this affirmation, offering it deeply into the superconscious mind. Feel that this affirmation is becoming one with your own being. I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. Pray silently with me. What matter if people blame me? Of what importance is their applause? I live to please Thee, Lord, confident that when Thou art with me I am protected, though it be from an enemy horde. And I'll read from Whispers from Eternity, and I will invite Steve to change the battery on the camera, which is just about to die. So people are going to lose their picture online for a second, but it's blinking rapidly. Okay. Well, maybe it's just decided to behave bizarrely today.
I might change the battery anyway. Momentarily, yeah.
Well, if it's good, then leave it be. I mean, okay, all right. So this is a reading from Yogananda's Whispers from Eternity, Answered Prayers. The caravan of my prayers is moving toward Thee. In the eyes of kindness I behold glimmers of Thy mercy. Even the bare trees of dark lives flicker with the myriad glowworms of Thy shining life. The caravan of my prayers has been working its way slowly through dry wastes of arid doubts and furious sandstorms of despondency. Yet at last, far-off glimpses of Thy oasis of silent assurance have roused me in my drooping efforts. Eagerly I await the moment when I can dip into thy revivifying water my parched, thirsty lips of faith, and there drink deeply from thy well of bliss. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
I will be reading from Rays of the One Light. These are weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, written by Swami Kriyananda based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Many are the pathways to truth. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. On the dedication page of Swami Kriyananda's book, The Path, appears the following account. A group of Paramahansa Yogananda's disciples had gone with him to see a movie about the life of Gyandev, a great saint of medieval India. Afterwards, they gathered and listened to the master explain certain subtler aspects of that inspiring story. A young man in the group mentioned another film he had seen years earlier in India about the life of Mirabai, a famous woman saint. If you had seen that movie, he exclaimed, you wouldn't even have liked this one. The guru rebuked him. Why make such comparisons? The lives of great saints manifest in various ways the same one God. The Bible contains a similar account in the Gospel of St. Luke. And John, said Master, we saw one casting out devils in thy name, and we forbade him, because he followeth not with us. And Jesus said unto him, forbid him not, for he that is not against us is for us. The more central a truth, the greater the number of contexts in which it can be applied. Truth is like a pure white light, containing within itself the full spectrum of the rainbow. Let no one tell you what your path to God ought to be. Many are the paths. Select your own according to the dictates of your own nature, no matter how out of step with others this puts you. Sri Krishna in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita states, trying even unsuccessfully to fulfill one's own spiritual duty or dharma is better than pursuing successfully the duties of others. Better death itself in the pursuance of one's own duties. The pursuance of others' duties is fraught with spiritual danger. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. I was reminded this morning of an experience that I had when I was very new to the path, new to Ananda. And Swami Kriyananda asked a group of us from Ananda Village to go into the big town of Nevada City. And this was a big trip for us in those days. And to hear a lecture from a Christian saint, really. His name, he's passed away now, but his name was Richard Wurmbrandt. And he had been captured by the communists in his own country. It was Romania, is that right? Mm-hmm. And had written many books about his experiences, and one of them was titled Tortured for Christ. He had gone through many horrific experiences in this prison. But I had not read the books they were over the top for me at that time, and so I didn't know much about him, just that Swami was inviting us to go and hear this lecture. So when Richard Wurmbrand came out onto the stage, I wasn't expecting anything in particular, but all of us from Ananda spontaneously stood up, and my heart physically leapt in my chest. Never had that experience before or since, but it was a profound moment for me. It was as though my heart recognized a saint. And he proceeded to tell many, many stories and was just a wonderful, warm, loving human being. I remember one of the stories was that they were shackled in prison, hands and feet, and even though they were being tortured, they would come into this state of love for God that was so intense that one time they were beating their shackles together in time with the music, like we do cymbals, and we're just in this ecstasy of love for God. And their torturers were just totally freaked out by this. They ran away. After the program, I don't think I personally met him, though I may have. But I remember he was standing around with a group of us, and there were many young women. I was only 22 at the time, 23 maybe. And I remember Richard saying to Swami as all of us were clustered around, "Do these women have to be beautiful in order to join your community?" And Swami said, "No, but it's what they are doing that makes them beautiful." And afterwards I met Richard Wurmbrand's wife, and she was just an incarnation of the Divine Mother. She was hugging us all and so sweet, just kindness personified. And that was an example to me of how rich and beautiful Christianity is. There is depth in that. And I never really appreciated Christ, having grown up Catholic, but it was only on this path that I came to really go deep in the love of Christ. And I feel like that's still blossoming in my consciousness, that deep love and respect. And what this Bible passage is saying, he who is not against us is for us. That's Christ saying to each of us to respect all religions, to honor every path. There are as many pathways to God as there are people. Each is on his unique path. Many years ago, we should have before and after the pandemic in terms of time. Long ago, before the pandemic, we used to have these wonderful interfaith gatherings, and we would go, a group of us singers, and we would sing something of Swami's music. And they're always very inspiring. They're just many, many different religions and choirs, and we share through music and maybe a few words about the essence of our path. Well, this one time, the last time that we were able to go, there was a Sufi group there, and we were just thrilled by their music, by their energy, and afterwards we connected with this couple that had been sort of leading their group. And we just stood there together, communing in the joy of God. And I think they felt the same. It seemed as though we were in the exact same point spiritually. That they had been following their teachings for many years, just as we have been following ours. And there was such a delight in being together and feeling that joy of spirit. Like when, well, not quite like it, they're much more advanced, but when Master Paramahansa Yogananda visited Therese Neumann, and the people around her said, well, you can't see her. And she came out and said, I will see the man of God from India. She felt that vibration. She felt that oneness. And that is the essence of all religions, getting to that state of oneness and communion with God. When we meet people who have that love of God, we can feel it. And we want to share that joy. My mother was very deeply Catholic and had her own little dogmatisms ingrained in there, even though she had studied yoga and practiced yoga for many years. She still had her rigid feelings. And I felt like I was the last person in the world to take those away from her. Let her be, let her have her own thoughts, and we would just connect in this other place of loving God. And that's what matters. Let people have their differences of opinion. Sometimes I think it's dogmatism is, well, Swami defines dogma as just a spiritual tenet. It's like an aphorism or something. But when it gets to be dogmatism, then it's substituting the belief for actual experience. And we have to experience God. There's truth in everywhere and everything. We just have to be still enough to perceive it. So, following, trying to, even unsuccessfully, to fulfill one's own spiritual duty or dharma is better than pursuing successfully the duties of others. It's difficult sometimes to know what our dharma is. What is God asking us to do? We can run circles in our minds trying to figure out, what should I do? What should I do? Where should... God wants only one thing of us, that we love him, and that we love him in everyone in our world. So if you're trying to figure out, what should I do? What is my next step? What is my dharma? What is my mission in life? It's very simple. If you love God more and more deeply, he will show you what he wants you to do. If you ask him every morning, Lord, how can I serve you today? How can I love you today? What can I do for you? Show me. He will. And be prepared. Sometimes it's something you didn't really think about before. But if you do that, you will see that he will be more and more with you. He's looking for people to do his will, to love others. He wants you. He's waiting for you to turn to him. And then everything will be made clear to you.
This passage in the Bible talking about the disciples getting excited about somebody else who didn't follow with them, casting out devils in Christ's name, and oh my goodness, no, you can't do that because you don't stick with us. And Christ's saying, let it be. It's an interesting commentary on the religious organizational aspect of the path, because there is this organizational element to the thing, and there's always a bit of compromise in it, because you're always going to have somebody shooting off in some direction, doing something that may be a little challenging or a little awkward, and so the disciples go to Christ and say, hey, what about him? He shouldn't be. It's like, let him be. He's not hurting anybody. They're doing something useful. Let it go. But there is this tendency, when we're uncomfortable in ourselves, to sort of project that out to somebody else and say, no, that's the problem over there. He's the one who's making me uncomfortable. And, Christ is saying, stick with your own. That's really the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. It's a fascinating little sidelight to that Bhagavad Gita passage talking about do what is yours to do. Follow your own spiritual duty. Trying to follow other people's is fraught with spiritual dangers, fraught with danger. That particular passage has often been used by fundamentalist Hindus to say that basically, if you're born into a particular caste, you are stuck there. That is your dharma. That is your duty, is to stay. It's like saying, you were born a blacksmith, you're going to be a blacksmith. There is no change of consciousness available to you. And that isn't valid. That's not a helpful way to look at it. But on an inward level, following what is our own path to follow is very much relevant. And it can be very challenging. I'm going to give you an interesting example of this. Nirmala and I have traveled a lot around the world for the purpose of teaching and helping create spiritual community in different places, as far-flung as Siberia and Singapore and India, etc. So we got used to flying a lot and followed I followed the aviation world because it's something that we did a lot of. And I remember we were living in India at the time when the miracle on the Hudson happened, when Captain Sully Sullenberger landed a plane in the Hudson River in New York because both engines had gone out right after takeoff. Now, the interesting thing, one of the things I learned from studying that and reading his book was there are 3 principles in the aviation world. And they are in order of priority, and they apply to all of us. I don't suppose that very many of us here in the room are pilots of aircraft in this world, but we are all pilots of the aircraft of our own lives. So the first one is aviate, which is to say, keep the plane flying. Get the plane up in the air and make it fly. Okay, that's the first rule, aviate. And I'll just segue from that for a second. If you think of a bird or a goose, we walk at the river, and so we're around all these geese all the time. A goose on the ground is not really at its potential. You visualize a goose on the ground with a coyote or a cougar or something that wants to eat it for lunch. The goose stuck on the ground is going to have a hard day with that equation. My dad told me there are geese who live in the area where he lives, and he watched this little drama play out once where there was a dog chasing the geese. And this one goose would stay about 10 feet away from the dog. And every time the dog came close, the goose would fly up just about 5 feet, just inches above what the dog could reach, and then go another 10 feet away. And the dog would come and the goose would go up in the air. Anyway, save it to say, a goose is a goose that can fly. I mean, the importance of getting up in the air if you're a bird is pretty critical. So, aviate. The second priority in aviation is navigate. Once you're in the air, now you're flying, where are you going to go? I mean, you don't just go around in circles. I mean, it's like unless that's the specific purpose of your mission, the job is to go where you're trying to get to. Okay, navigate. The third principle is communicate. Talk to the passengers, talk to the air traffic control, share what you're doing, why you're doing it, what's happening, etc. Aviate, navigate, communicate. So, Sullenberger takes off, loses both engines, and suddenly the aviate part of this equation is in serious jeopardy. He's got no engines at just a little under 3,000 feet, going up. I mean, you don't keep going up very far when your engines go out in a plane like that. So he had to figure out the navigation part really, really fast. Well, meanwhile, air traffic control, they're trying to talk to air traffic control and communicate what's going on and figure out what the alternatives are. They start suggesting, well, can you turn around and go back to the airport you just came from? No. What about this airport that's nearby in New Jersey? This is in New York. Now, he has to make a decision in that moment based on incomplete information. Meanwhile, he's taken control of the aircraft. If you've never seen the movie of this, it's quite an impressive movie. First thing he says is my aircraft, meaning I'm the one flying the plane, which puts the co-pilot to trying to figure out how to reboot the engines and figure out what can we do. And he decides, okay, what I see based on what I've got right now, which is a dead plane, is I'm going to the Hudson River. Well, twice they try to talk him out of it. What about this airport? What about that airport? He doesn't respond. He's listening to the message from the inside. It's not that he doesn't hear the message from the outside, because obviously you're supposed to listen to air traffic control, but he's in a completely unfamiliar situation. There is nothing in his training. This is the fascinating part. He trained pilots and aviators to do emergency procedures when disaster happens. He was a trainer of pilots. So, could you get any better than that? I mean, it's kind of incredible. But nevertheless, he had to decide in the moment, okay, I'm going to do this other thing over here. So he starts heading for the river. Never mind. I mean, part of the reason that the air traffic control is trying to talk him out of it is because landing in water is not generally a successful recipe. It's like, that doesn't work out very well. Definitely doesn't work out for the plane, but generally speaking, it doesn't really work out for the passengers either. But that was the best judgment he could make in the time. And so he lands the thing in the Hudson River. And the communication part, only 2 times did he say anything to the crew. And, one of them was to sort of get everybody to pay attention, and the second one was brace for impact. The whole rest of the time, they were trying to restart the engines. They were trying to figure out how to get this thing down. Well, in our lives, we don't necessarily fly airplanes for a living, but all of us have to lift our energy. That is the one path to God that is universal to all, that applies to all. How we lift our energy up. That's where the pathways are many. Everybody's going to find their own way. Some people it's going to be singing and dancing. Other people it's going to be inward meditation. Some people it's going to be spiritual study. Other people it's going to be service to the poor. Find other people it's going to be the artistic expression of the creative process from the inside. Find what will uplift you. That's the aviation part, and it is the first priority. Get your energy up, moving towards the divine, up here at the point between the eyebrows. The second part is navigate. And for us, not to speak of the airplane world, but figure out where is your life going, how to navigate through the world, because all of us have an outward role to play in the world. Aviate first, navigate second. The third is communicate, which is to say, share what you've learned. Share what you know. Help others to experience the blessings that you've experienced. And this can be a little tricky, and I think this is at least partly what Christ was talking about in the sort of let him be discussion, because often when something works for us, the first thing we want to do is drive it down somebody else's throat and say, no, you have to do this. You got to try this. And it has to be this light touch. This is something I really appreciated from Autobiography of a Yogi. All these different saints that Yogananda meets. And, he's visiting them. He's searching for his guru. Never, ever is anybody trying to twist his arm and say, no, you have to do this. He's looking for that inward, in a sense, what he's looking for is what Nirmala described in meeting that saint. He's looking for that moment when his heart leaps. And for Yogananda, that happens when he meets Sri Yukteswar behind me here. And he just knew, okay, this is my guru, this is my path, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to follow. But all of us have to find that outward way on our own. And the air traffic control of other people may have their opinions. Okay, they have their opinions. Sometimes those opinions are quite useful. Sometimes they're really, really helpful. Sometimes they're life-saving. But sometimes they're a distraction. And how you discern between those is to have a lively, deep inner life. And again, how you find that inner life, how you cultivate that inner life, that's up to each person individually. But the blessing of it is such that we will know, just as Nirmala was saying, we will know once we're in that space what God is asking for us to do. And I'm going to share a story that I thought she was going to share. But this is a very odd, this is a true story, how Tootsie Rolls saved a group of soldiers in the Korean War. It's a very strange thing, but it's literally true. So there was I don't know if it was a company or a battalion. I've never really learned those names properly, so forgive me for the details. But a group of soldiers in the Korean War was basically out of ammunition and was essentially surrounded or nearly surrounded. And the temperature was disastrously cold, freezing, minus 20, minus 30 degrees. And they radioed for supplies. And the code name for the supplies that they wanted, which happened to be 60 millimeter mortar rounds, which is, 60 millimeters is about that big a round. I don't know how long they were, but I mean, mortar shells are going to do some damage. They were called Tootsie Rolls. So they asked for a whole boatload of these Tootsie Rolls. And you can probably, to be airdropped in. So you can probably imagine where this is going. The guy hearing the message did not have the call sheet, explaining Tootsie Roll equals 60 millimeter mortar round. So what do they get? They get just a boatload of actual Tootsie Rolls. It's like, okay, What should we do? We should feed them to the enemy, and maybe that'll kill them? I mean, where are we going to go with this? Their gas lines were freezing. Their equipment wouldn't operate because they kept springing leaks because it was so unbelievably cold. So what did they do? They warmed up the Tootsie Rolls. They literally warmed the Tootsie Rolls and stuck them around the gas lines, and they plugged the leaks in the equipment that they had, and they got the heck out of there. And that saved them. And I don't know, now this is one of those speculations that would be interesting. I didn't follow the story to the nth degree here. But it would be interesting to find out if they had gotten the Tootsie Rolls they were looking for instead of the actual Tootsie Rolls, would they in fact have survived? It's an open question. Maybe they would have blasted a whole lot of people and a whole lot of countryside to smithereens, but they themselves might actually have died as a result because they wouldn't probably have been able to evacuate, where the bizarre delivery of actual Tootsie Rolls ended up saving them. Life will sometimes send us Tootsie Rolls, and I don't really recommend eating them if you can help it. But what do you do with the bizarre when it comes to you? You do what you've been trained to do, or because that's a little bit passive to say it that way. Because when we grow up, we're trained to do certain things. We're trained to take care of our bodies. We're trained to, in the attitudes that we observe and that we emulate towards other people, etc., etc. Okay, that's been trained. But how will I train myself? What will I train my consciousness to do? How will I train my willingness to adjust to the Tootsie Roll that got delivered that I didn't order? I didn't ask for actual Tootsie Rolls, but I got actual Tootsie. What are you going to do? Because it's very easy in that moment to just go, lost both engines. One of the things that Sullenberger did is he turned on the auxiliary power unit, the APU, which is like 17th on the list of things to do, because all the emergency procedures deal with one engine going out. They don't deal with both engines going out. He realized very suddenly, gosh, if I don't have any engines, I don't have any ability to control this airplane. If I don't turn that auxiliary power unit takes the rushing air that's passing by the aircraft and turns it into electric power to control the hydraulics and control all the controls of the wings and etc. So he couldn't steer the plane if he didn't have that. He knew intuitively, if I don't get that thing going, this airplane's just going to crash in a big heap on the ground. All of us will come to know from the inside, I have to do that now, even though it's not on the list or it's way down the list. We will find that ability in ourselves from inward awareness and from trust, from learning to trust, which is what faith involves. Faith is way more than belief. Belief is what gets you into kindergarten. Faith is what graduates you from a PhD. It's like you have earned it, you have walked it, you have learned it, understood it, and lived it. Then you go on and you deal with the Tootsie Rolls and you go, okay, well, I guess we're going to warm those suckers up and we're going to put them around the fuel lines and we're going to somehow get out of here. And all of us will be faced with certain situations where something came that we didn't expect. And it's life's way of saying, okay, what are you going to do now? And when you do it, there's tremendous growth on the inside. Richard Wurmbrand gets tortured. What are you going to do? Oh, well, what do you say today we pound the shackles together and make music and go into the divine? There's not a whole lot else we can do. What do you say we do that? Well, all of us have the luxury of a beautiful place to live, a beautiful life, outwardly for the most part, I would think. What about inwardly? Let's make the inward life rich and full and deep. Whatever the outward path is, find the inward, living truth in it. And the realization that come will be unbelievable. Namaste. So we'll take an offering and then share some music with you. Go ahead.